June 1944. The shores of Normandy. A soldier lay on the beach. He hadn't yet realized his leg was gone. Surrounded by noise, smoke and screaming, he was staring at nothing but the sky. Then someone leaned over him. A small metal needle, a single press, and within minutes the world began to slow. That soldier didn't know how many times he'd encountered morphine that day. Maybe once, maybe 3 times. But in that moment, the only thing he knew was this. The pain was retreating. Morphine has embedded itself into the battlefield more deeply than any drug in history. As one of the most powerful analgesics ever known, it was carried in the kits of millions of soldiers from the First World War to the Second, from Korea to Vietnam. It calmed the wounded, prepared the ground for surgical intervention, and made the final hours of dying soldiers more bearable. But morphine was also one of the most dangerous tools ever handed to a fighting force, because this substance didn't simply eliminate pain, it separated a man from the pain itself. This is the story of morphine, and the story of that dark, necessary bargain war makes with the human body. Friedrich Sertürner was a 20-year-old pharmacy apprentice, and he was trying to isolate something strange from the resin of the opium poppy. It was 1804. Opium had been known for centuries used in Egypt, in Sumer, in ancient Greece, but no one had yet managed to extract its active compound in pure form. Sertürner processed raw opium through a series of acid and base solutions until he was left with a white crystalline powder. To test its effects, he first experimented on dogs, then on himself and several young volunteers. The results were striking. At low doses, a profound calm and freedom from pain. At high doses, a dangerous clouding of consciousness. Sertürner named the substance morphium, after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. Chemically, this alkaloid acted on the central nervous system, suppressing pain perception at the level of the brainstem. It bound to the body's own opioid receptors, dulling both the physical sensation of pain and the emotional response that accompanied it. The medical world adopted the discovery slowly but steadily. Pharmacies began producing morphine preparations. Physicians prescribed it for chronic pain. But morphine's true introduction came on the battlefield, and that introduction took on a shape no one had anticipated. When Scottish physician Alexander Wood invented the hypodermic syringe in 1853, he was probably not thinking about the battlefield. But the change his invention set in motion was inevitable. Morphine could now be delivered directly into the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive system entirely. Effects began within minutes. In the conditions of open surgery, this was revolutionary. For surgeons in the Crimean War who had relied on crude opium preparations and alcohol, morphine injection offered a level of control that had never existed before. The real test came with the American Civil War. From 1861 to 1865, the Union and Confederate armies combined used approximately 10 million doses of morphine. Ammunition pouches now carried morphine syringes alongside rifles. Many soldiers were taught to self-administer. Amputations were performed in barns and field tents, most often with chloroform and morphine-assisted procedures. The wounded remained calmer during transport, and surgeons could carry out longer, more deliberate interventions. On the battlefield, morphine worked. Everyone could see that, but what emerged after the war ended was something no one had been fully prepared for. Shortly after the war's end, a strange pattern began surfacing among veterans and hospitals across the United States. Soldiers whose wounds had healed, whose treatments were complete, were continuing to use morphine, not simply because their pain hadn't gone away. When they tried to stop, they experienced violent headaches, sweating, tremors, and a deep, relentless restlessness. Some went to extraordinary lengths to obtain the drug. Physicians of the era called the condition soldier's disease, or morphinism. Tens of thousands of veterans were estimated to be struggling with it, but the medical establishment had neither a clear diagnostic framework nor an effective treatment. The mechanism was visible even then. Morphine was resetting the central nervous system's baseline. The brain, accustomed to functioning in the presence of the drug, responded with severe reactions when the dose was removed. What was not yet fully understood was that hypodermic injection created a far faster and deeper dependence than oral administration. and field doctors continued prescribing morphine freely for days, for weeks, sometimes for months. These warnings were largely set aside when the world lurched toward war again in 1914. In the first months of the Western Front, trench warfare had revealed itself to be both merciless and prolonged. The number of wounded was rising with every offensive, and the pressure on field surgeons was reaching a breaking point. The British Army began distributing single-use morphine tubes containing approximately 16 milligrams small metal syringes that could be applied subcutaneously with minimal training. They were practical, they were fast, and in critical moments they saved lives. But dosage control in the field was nearly impossible. A wounded soldier might pass through the hands of multiple medics before reaching a dressing station. The first would administer morphine and hand the casualty off. The next, unaware of the previous dose, might administer again. Overdose led to respiratory depression. Respiratory depression led to death. To counter this, a crude but functional system was developed. The letter M was marked on the forehead of any soldier who had received morphine, or the used needle was pinned to his uniform. The system was imperfect. The battlefield was never otherwise, but it provided at least a visible warning. Dependence created a separate crisis. Wounded men who had undergone extended treatment were sometimes discharged having already developed a physiological dependency. And behind the lines, obtaining morphine turned out to be far easier than anyone wanted to admit. At this point, the pharmacological world offered what seemed like a paradoxical solution, a way to make morphine safer. In 1898, Bayer Laboratories synthesized a new compound, diacetyl morphine. This chemically modified version of the morphine molecule converted back to morphine rapidly once inside the body. Bayer marketed it initially as a treatment for morphine addiction. Its trade name was heroin, derived from the German heroisch, meaning strong or heroic. The company's claim was straightforward. Heroin provided the same analgesic effect as morphine at a lower dose, without producing dependence. That claim was quickly disproven. Heroin crossed the blood-brain barrier far faster than morphine. Its addiction potential was not lower but higher. Yet this failure created pressure to understand morphine more rigorously. By the time the Second World War arrived, standardized morphine syrettes had been incorporated into every soldier's individual kit. Printed instructions appeared on each tube. Users were instructed to pin the used needle to their uniform and record the time of administration. From Normandy to the Pacific, these small tubes became one of the most critical instruments in battlefield medicine. But the remote islands of the Pacific would introduce a problem no one had fully anticipated. Throughout the Second World War, American military data documented the effect of morphine on surgical outcomes in terms that were difficult to dispute. When pain was controlled, the wounded remained calmer and the progression of traumatic shock slowed. This translated directly into survival rates. In the First World War, battlefield wound mortality had exceeded 8%. By the Second World War, that figure had fallen to near 4%. Improved protocols, morphine among them, were assessed as playing a decisive role in that reduction, but morphine's function extended beyond surgical support. For casualties classified as expectant, those with wounds so severe that survival was not considered viable, morphine carried a different meaning entirely. The decision to administer it in those cases was not about stabilization, it was about dying with less suffering. The medics who made those calls carried a weight that no protocol could fully address. The Pacific Theatre added another layer of difficulty. In operations across remote islands, evacuation times were long. The longer a wounded soldier remained in the field, the longer his exposure to morphine. Marine Corps records indicated that extended administration protocols significantly elevated the risk of dependence among survivors, men who had come through the combat only to face a different kind of battle on the other side. And then came Vietnam, which placed morphine in a context no one had foreseen. Over the decades, a number of persistent myths took hold around morphine's role in war. The most widespread was this: short-term battlefield use of morphine inevitably leads to addiction. Clinical evidence does not support that claim. Individuals in the presence of active, severe pain process morphine differently from those who are not in pain. the brain's response to the drug under conditions of acute trauma is measurably distinct. This does not make every field application safe, but the generalization that a single dose produces addiction does not hold against clinical reality. The reverse error proved equally costly across history. The belief that controlled use posed no significant risk drove prescribing patterns from the Civil War through Vietnam that left tens of thousands of veterans in dependent cycles that took years to surface and longer to treat. A third myth that morphine was administered to soldiers to enhance combat performance is largely without foundation. Morphine is a sedative and analgesic. It suppresses the central nervous system rather than stimulating it. The substances used to increase battlefield endurance and alertness were stimulants: Pervitin among German forces, Benzedrine among the Allies. Morphine's role was precisely the opposite: to remove a soldier from combat by managing the consequences of injury. Understanding that distinction is essential to understanding what morphine actually was on the battlefield and what it was not. Morphine's legacy in military medicine extends well beyond the compound itself. The triage protocols developed after the Second World War defined morphine management as inseparable from pain control and shock prevention. NATO forces carried morphine syrettes as standard individual kit items throughout the Cold War. Research into dependence mechanisms laid the groundwork for the development of opioid antagonists, naloxone among them, which can reverse morphine and opioid overdose, and today appears in combat medical kits alongside the drug. It is designed to counteract. Modern battlefield medicine still uses morphine, but the protocols have changed substantially. In operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, ketamine and fentanyl were introduced alongside morphine, each with a different duration of action, a different respiratory depression profile, and a different risk of dependence. The fundamental question, however, has not changed. How is pain controlled? How is the wounded stabilized? How is a life saved at the lowest possible cost? Friedrich Sertürner's white crystalline powder has been wrestling with that question for 200 years. For the soldier on the beach at Normandy, morphine was simply this: a pause between the wound and whatever came next. But for those who came home, the struggle often began not on the front line but after discharge. Dependence, withdrawal, sleeplessness, tremors. These were wounds of a different kind, invisible, undecorated, and largely unmapped by the institutions that had handed out the drug in the first place. Morphine made war, medicine, and human fragility visible all at once. That is why it is not simply a drug. It is the quietest witness to the dark and necessary bargain that war makes with the body.